All right, let's do it again. So my inbox gets lit up today by my wonderful subscribers who were requesting that I go live and talk about the events of the day that were unfolding. Of course, the war that was starting and officially starting. We said it was starting unofficially months ago, which is why I'm not even mildly surprised nor interested, really, to be brutally honest, because I'm more so thinking about the bigger thing which is going to happen next. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. We're also going to contextualize the official start of this war in the context of the hours that preceded it and the very critical events that a lot of people have already forgotten about. Now, I had the live stream thing all set up, and then I realized, you know what? I have zero insights to provide on a situation that is developing and fluid, and it would just be me sorting the wheat from the chaff, the disinformation from the reality, and the internet's going to do that in a few hours anyways. So I'm not a guy who just likes to read stuff. I like to think, and this is what we have to do as preppers. Anybody can get on here and just read a piece of paper. It's the unique observations and analytics that we're trying to provide here. So this is what I think is about to happen, but we first need to just think about what happened in the hours preceding this. And I also want to say that we were saying just a couple weeks ago that with this whole Epstein thing going on and all the other distractions, the guys in the tunnels in New York City and the Biden stuff and the Trump stuff, there's just so many distractions, even UFOs. People are talking about it matter of fact now. And there's so many distractions that they needed to have this big event, another black swan, and here it is. This is it, because they just kicked a hornet's nest. They opened Pandora's box, they lit a fire, and they ain't going to be able to put it out, okay? Now, let's go back to what happened about 12 hours before this event. The Iranians, yes, that's the nexus. Everything comes back to Iran in the Middle East right now, okay? And the Iranians commandeered a vessel. Well, did they really commandeer it? That's the language that we're being told. Or did they just take it back? Because the U.S. had seized the vessel a year prior, and they also seized the oil in the vessel to the tune of 1 million barrels. They renamed it St. Nicholas, and some genius got the bright idea to bring it into the Arabian Sea once again, load it up with oil, and taunt the Iranians. And so hours after this event happens, Rishi Sunak, the UK Prime Minister, calls an emergency meeting. Okay, and that's when everybody knew, okay, this was it, this was on. The internet knew hours before the attack was going to happen, but you wouldn't know it if you were watching the big five mainstream media conglomerates. Legacy media, that's what we're supposed to call it. ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, and Fox News, right? So the internet was abuzz with the prospects of the war starting within hours. And it wasn't up until 45 minutes to an hour after the event had actually occurred, like the initial strikes began, that all of the mainstream media in unison, because I was keeping track, I was refreshing pages, and I got the screenshots to prove it. At, approximately 5 o'clock my time, in the time zone I'm in, it was all Hunter Biden, Trump, and some other thing about the other candidates. And by 5:05 or whatever, every single mainstream news in unison, they had their whole pre-scripted thing that was handed down from them by the Associated Press gods or whatever sort of media filter is used to control the flow of information here in the West. And they put it in front of us, and that was it. Just like a light switch. Bam. Front page. Everywhere. Totally pre-scripted. You know all their targets. They've been pre-selecting these targets for months. They've been studying. Their human intelligence game in Yemen is terrible because the Houthis, they just don't give a shit. And this is the reason why we're not going to be able to beat the Houthis. I mean, we're going to drop a whole lot of bombs and it's going to do a whole lot of nothing. It's probably going to maybe gradually grind their capabilities in terms of their anti-ship capabilities and their ballistic missile capabilities and take away more of their high-level capabilities that they're getting from the Iranians and their radar stations and command and control centers. But you're never going to, I mean, they're never going to do a ground invasion because that would just be pointless. These are people who are, they're poor and they're ready to die, okay? I mean, we have such low pain tolerance. Nobody wants to join the military. I mean, the best we're willing to commit to is bombing a country that has no air defense. That's what we're willing to do. And the Israelis, you know, well, they're obligated to go a step further because they're fighting on their turf, right? And the Ukrainians, well, they're just, don't get me started on that. They're just getting used and abused. So we have no pain tolerance, but these people are going to fight to the death, and they're ready to fight to the death. And for them, it's an honor, okay? It's a witness me, you know, type thing with the Lord Humongous and Mad Max. That's what level these guys are on, the honey badgers, all right? So like flicking a switch, the news shifts. And so we know in the run-up to this that this was all about the Iran capturing the vessel. Now, the only thing that is difficult to factor into that analysis is the fact that according to the laws in the United States, Biden has to notify Congress 48 hours in advance of initiating a limited strike. To declare all-out war, it has to be approved by Congress, right? But apparently there's some clause that he can do limited strikes, just like Trump did in Syria when he was in. And it's with congressional approval, he can do it. So that would mean that if this was done lawfully in accordance with U.S. law, then Biden would have had to notify Congress 48 hours in advance, or maybe he did this weeks in advance. I don't know if it has to be exactly 48 or if he can play the card whenever he wants. I don't know what Congress has to disclose to the public. I don't know the U.S. laws. I just know there's already a little controversy around this. But quite frankly, it doesn't matter. I mean, you know, the Houthis knew this was coming. They were ready for this war. They've been preparing for it. So now it's begun. So what this would mean then, potentially, is that perhaps, and this would be a fairly sophisticated Machiavellian play on the part of the United States, maybe they sailed this St. Nicholas vessel through the Strait of Hormuz, got it loaded up with oil, knowing that the Iranians were going to try to take it back, and then perhaps this was the trigger, but that doesn't entirely make sense either. It almost looks like they just were short-sighted and didn't think that the Iranians would capture the ship, and they did. And they did this. They were scrambling, and they just reacted with a pre-planned targeting of 100-odd, guided munitions. It was a pretty heavy bombardment, and that they had just executed a plan that was pre-existing after the Iranians, to send the Iranians a message. Now, last night, I reported that they were doing a major exercise in the southern part of Iran called the Great Prophet 18. And I think I mentioned that this might be the beginning of, because there are no military exercises, only World War III disguises, right? There's a t-shirt, by the way. Somebody's put that on a t-shirt and they're selling it. Anyways, the problem here, guys, is, yes, this all revolves around the nexus of Iran. But the other problem arises in the Saudis permitted the permitted the U.S. coalition to use their airspace. And Yemen has warned Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates, and Qatar that if it opens its airspace to the U.S. and British military, it means they are officially starting a war with Yemen. Now, Russia has called for an emergency session of the United Nations Security Council. You might as well just be pissing in the wind at this point with the UN. And you now have protests throughout the region, okay? So the IRGC-backed militias have already pledged that they are going to start attacking American bases across the Middle East. So here's what's going to happen next, okay? You are going to have terrorist attacks in the United States, in Europe, because the Houthis, they don't give a shit. And above and beyond that, you got all the sleeper cells coming over the border. I know that Siraj and Shirilio, is making a whole new gig out of trying to blame the Russians for the border crisis so that they can get more funding for Ukraine. But there is a lot of truth to the fact that there's probably a lot of bad apples coming over the border because, let's face it, it's open season down there. So what this means is that attacks are just going to start to escalate all around the region, and it's just going to turn into a shooting match. And the Houthis, and this is where the Americans, they think, oh, well, they didn't hit a warship. And there's rumors about they shot down an F-22, yet there's no F-22s in the theater. I think it was F-15s and F-18s. And that, you know, they took down a warship and all this stuff, which is really irrelevant because this is gray zone, asymmetrical, guerrilla-style warfare, man. And when you are dependent on a global supply chain, that is a massive attack surface. And this is why a lot of empires fall, because they get so big and because their societies start becoming so interlinked and their supply chains so complicated that you can just shoot missiles anywhere. You can start shooting missiles into Saudi Arabia, now Saudi Aramco, and they can start, causing all kinds of ruckus throughout the region just by targeting critical infrastructure, targeting commercial vessels. You're not going to be able to protect them all. You're just not. And this is what they're going to do, and it's going to cause incredible hardship for the planet because, of course, inflation is going to go through the roof. Oil is still, people are like, oil's up. I'm looking at it's 2%, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, you know, the market must be so manipulated at this point in time. I mean, think about it. With everything that we know, with all of the bears, you know, just coming out of the woodwork, given their very pessimistic outlooks for 2024, and you got the market close to all-time highs and proportionally speaking, more overvalued than it was in 1929, right before the Great Depression, okay? One of the peak of the markets. The only thing that tops it was the dot-com bubble, and we got very close to that in 2020, but it pulled back, of course. But, you know, what this tells us is that the whole thing is rigged. And let me tell you something else before I get into my prognostication, because I forgot to mention this yesterday, this observation. You know, if I was a money man, and there's some real smart economists out there that understand money. People think Powell's an idiot, but, you know, these guys understand what they're doing, okay? They understand what they're working with. And if I knew that the system was going to collapse, I would probably release something for the people. If you know there's a revolution coming, this is, you know, age-old, you know, wisdom from, you know, the tyrants of old. If you know there's a revolution coming, get ahead of it. It's called controlled opposition. So what do? You get this mysterious Satoshi figure to release this new type of currency called Bitcoin. Because I don't think they truly thought that the system would last as long as it has with the whole quantitative easing thing. I think they're quite surprised. And there's a variety of factors that might contribute to why things are still going as well as they are, in spite of why the dollar should be worthless at this point in time. But I think that Bitcoin is not only to take capital away from commodities and try to suppress the price of gold, not to spook the markets, but it's also put there as a safeguard to get people ready for the system to collapse. Anyways, something for you to think about. So what's going to happen is attacks are going to ramp up throughout the region. The war with Lebanon and Israel is about to start any day now, I reckon. And the West Bank and Jordan are going to erupt. Iraq is going to descend into chaos. And there is a distinct possibility that Russia is going to enter the war in Syria. And when that happens, that's when things get scary. Things also get scary in the sense that Iran, although they don't officially have a nuclear weapon, they have a lot of fissionable materials. And perhaps there is the possibility that they utilize these fissionable materials in dirty bombs, or they maybe some or their militias or these terrorist groups get a hold of this stuff. And but it's very likely that if that did happen, that would work to our advantage more. So unless they are slipping, then I don't think they would do that. But that is a possibility. There is, of course, the possibility that Iran already has nuclear weapons. But I think the greater threat here is that Russia right now is strategically dependent on the Iranians and the North Koreans. A lot of people, the Russia bros, they don't want to admit that. They just think that this weapons coming in from North Korea and Iran are just kind of supplementary. But I actually think it's getting to the point where it's essential. In spite of the fact that in terms of the Russian economy, how it compares to the broader European economy, I think they're on the top now in terms of GDP, possibly even ahead of Germany. But don't quote me on that. Regardless, it doesn't matter. In spite of the fact that they're still holding up okay, there's still a lot of problems in Russia. I mean, they're having gas shortages. There's power outages all throughout Moscow because they're experiencing one of the worst winters ever. Meanwhile, everywhere else is experiencing one of the warmest winters ever, except in the last week where, you know, the temperature dropped well below zero. And right now, I believe it's minus 30, as it should be. This is typical this time of year. But up until this point, there's been no winter, hence the heat hog heaters behind me here that we're reviewing. Anyways, Iran is a lifeline for Russia. So Russia's not going to let Iran go down without a fight. And I would almost suspect that it's possible that Russia has already made some back channel negotiations with the United States that leave Iran alone, or there's going to be nuclear problems in the same way that the US and NATO is saying leave Zelensky alone or else there's going to be nuclear problems, okay? So the question is, what did the Americans hit? Well, as far as we know, there were 60 targets at 16 Iranian-backed. They always say Iranian-backed, and there might be some truth to that. But remember, they're using that loosely. And I don't think Iran is necessarily coordinating all this stuff. The Middle East is such a tribalistic, faction region that I don't think that they have that kind of control. But I do think they all have the common enemy as they see us, and that's, of course, NATO and the coalition. So they used 100 precision-guided munitions. They took out command and control nodes, munition depots, launch systems, production facilities, and air defense radar systems. Now, here's what the general of the Houthis had to say after this attack. So if you think that they're relenting, you are dead wrong. Get a load of this. Do the American, British, and Zionists expect that any aggressive act against Yemen will distract us from defending Gaza? We swear. Remember, this is a people who has nothing to lose, right? We swear, even if we turned into atoms scattered in the air, and I wonder why they used the word atoms there. Interesting. We will not leave Gaza. We will continue to target Zionist ships and those going to the Zionist entity. We will confront America, make it kneel, burn its warships, all its bases, and anybody who cooperates with it. No matter what it costs, we will not leave Gaza. Let the great war ignite, for we are its people and its men. To our brothers, to our people, our sons, our fathers in Gaza, we are with you. You are not alone, yada, yada, yada. And what will God say to us when we meet him? That whole thing. So if you want to see a whole new level of self-deletion bombers, I think you're going to get it here with the Houthis. The world must prepare to hear of America's defeat. I say this with all pride. We will trample America under our feet. The battlefield will teach those who do not know us about our might and severity. I mean, that's more zeal than I've heard coming out of most Middle Eastern groups in a long time, since the time of ISIS. And, well, let's not talk about who created them. Switching gears, let's go to Europe. Swedish panic buying. Now, this has been a little overhyped. Apparently, people in Sweden are saying there ain't no panic buying here. But reportedly, hysteria surrounding the comments by the commander of their military has led to panic buying emergency supplies after the government and military warned that people have to be prepared for war. Now, it's probably happening, but it's low key. So people are maybe making a few more purchases online, which I would strongly recommend. I mean, if there's anything that I would be putting my resources into first and foremost, it's commodities of some sort. But they're not necessarily panic buying. Estonia is preparing for war. So Estonia supports the legislation of Ukrainian strikes on Russian military targets with Western weapons. So they're saying that they approve of attacks deep within Russia. Now, there's been some incredibly dangerous rhetoric lately about the Ukrainians attacking deep inside Russian territory and bringing the war to Russia using NATO weapons, which is new, which there was a taboo and a restriction on doing. In fact, the HIMARS had a restriction that, I don't know if it was geofenced or what, they couldn't actually fire the missiles into Russia. Now that's been removed. Okay, so Estonia is committing to provide another 1.2 billion in aid to Ukraine until 2027. So, I mean, they're thinking this war is going to go on forever, guys. But 1.2 billion is a drop in the bucket, but Estonia is a small country. Germany's likely going to be footing most of the bill. Now, this story is crazy. I probably should have mentioned this at the start of the video because people need to know this. But there was an earthquake of a magnitude 2.4 that hit near North Korea's nuclear test site. Now, I don't know the seismology of this region. I'm not sure if this is a region that's prone to earthquakes, but that's incredibly suspicious, especially in light of the fact that there's been a lot of, and I think I talked about this just last month, that the North Koreans, there was a lot of activity around the region where they conducted their previous nuclear strikes. The quake was detected at 7 p.m. at a depth of 20 kilometers, 12 miles, according to the Korea Meteorological Administration. So that's pretty deep. I don't think you can go that deep, but, and who knows how accurate that is, and who knows this Korea Meteorological Administration is at South Korea, you know, so interesting. U.S. officials see rising risk of Hezbollah attacks on Americans in the Middle East and possibly on U.S. soil, according to Politico. And the other thing I was getting all kinds of emails about was the whole brain virus disease X thing that John, not doctor, but the nurse educator, whatever he is, the COVID guy. He was talking about how, yeah, biowarfare is a thing and they're making viruses with 100% lethality. The only thing I would say to that is if you're making a virus with 100% lethality, it probably is not going to spread that well unless there's a really long incubation period. And I think it's the first time where I've heard John Campbell really so convincingly talk about biowarfare. I made several videos of biowarfare years ago in the run-up to the pandemic. I think that is one of the greatest risks at this point in time. It's a great asymmetrical tactic to use. Unfortunately, it inevitably backfires unless you genetically tune it, but I don't even think you can, you know, confine nature from evolving after you create something like that. So that's the news, guys. I will keep you posted, but just expect total chaos to ensue. And yeah, you know the market's rigged if the price of oil doesn't go through the roof tomorrow. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.